And
it started around 30 years ago when Australian stockmen jumped out of the saddle and onto the trail bike to do the mustering. On the big stations, the job's done today with bikes, quads, four-wheel drives and helicopters. But everything comes with a cost, and in this case, it's the maintenance of expensive machinery and damage to harried cattle. So now some in the cattle industry are getting back on the horse. And as Anthony Hoy reports, that means teaching a new generation of stockmen how to saddle up and ride.
there is no end to what you can learn from this horse. So horsemanship, as far as I'm concerned, is not a destination, it's a journey for life.
On cattle stations throughout Australia, that journey is all but over. Horses have given way to machines, and stockmen have dropped the reins and left the horse behind.
It's getting harder and harder to get fellas to come into this country. And as far as the riding deal, well, most kids now grow up with scooters and motorbikes and all that. They get trail bikes or they get four-wheel drives and all that. But that's what's sort of taken over a lot on the land is it's mechanised.
Men like Phil Rohde and Perce Crumlin belong to a generation that's seen the gradual decline of the horse in rural Australia.
But what you're trying to get done is to get to where eventually you have two minds become one.
Perce Crumlin is regarded as one of the beef industry's senior statesmen, currently overseeing the horse breeding program for the Stanbroke Pastoral Company.
Like helicopters only came in the 1960s when we couldn't clean up the TB. Well, we'd muster a paddock. You had to get every beast. So we went back to mustering with the horses and the helicopters combined. And of course, because sometimes we've been very short of labour, well, the helicopters sort of got a bit of a go on.
Perce was recruited by the late Robert Holmes à Court to sort out the mechanised mayhem on the iconic Victoria River Downs in the Northern Territory, known Australia-wide as the Big Run.
There was 22 stationed at the station, but they done all everywhere else too. But there was hardly any horses used on the place, and the cattle were quite out of hand.
It became known as rip, tear and bust mustering, bruising cattle destined for market and blamed for the unnecessary death of thousands of young cattle.
Well, it's all the pace you go. And a little fella just born, he can't keep up. And then, of course, Mum goes that quick, she can't remember where she had him. So when she goes back to the paddock 3 or 4 days after, the dogs have got the calf, he's gone.
And just as the helicopter became popular in the pastoral industry in the 60s, so too did the motorbike.
With the bike, you don't have to catch it or shoe it. With the bike, you just put fuel in it, check the oil and drive off.
I hate the sight of motorbikes. They're a necessary evil. You know, you only got 3 or 4 blokes to jump on a bike and go and do something, but they don't do anything for your cattle.
And there are other downsides. The cost of fuel and running repairs for motorbikes is also a consideration. Just as the animal husbandry side of the industry has changed, so too have the ringers and the stockmen. You were saying, you know, whereas in days gone by the typical ringer was elastic-sided boots and the cowboy hat, what's the motorbike done to him? What are they like now?
Oh, he got a black jacket on and big boots, but he hasn't got no cattle sense.
And, in some cases, not a lot of road sense either.
If anybody gets hurt off a motorbike, the first thing they'll say, I wasn't going fast. Well, you know that's a lie straight away. Because nearly when you see them, there's one blur of dust and they're flat, over holes and God knows what. And the motorbike can't see. And some of the accidents are really bad. Broken legs and, you know, they're not just like you get thrown off a horse and get up and dust yourself and have a bit of a laugh and away you go again. No. Really, really bad accidents.
But on the plus side, today's mechanised cowboy can cover greater distances.
Oh, we've got long-range tanks on them, so we usually take the whole day. Probably go, we could usually do 200k a day if we had to. Get through it all right.
And cover all terrain, anywhere they can't go, the bikes?
No, go anywhere, yeah.
And the motorbike ringer is better equipped than John Wayne or Clint Eastwood ever were.
We've got the UHF and the holster. We've got a camelback on the back, a water bag. Yeah, I've actually got a cord and speaker and that inside my helmet, so I hear everything, no matter what I'm doing. If I'm riding my bike, travelling to somewhere or to get some cattle, I can hear anything, so I don't miss anything.
So you're communicating with each other and back to the homestead, is that right?
Yep.
In touch all the time?
Yes.
Recently, though, there's been a swing back to the use of horses on cattle properties as operators see the value in breeding quieter cattle. By replacing mechanical mustering with stockman on horseback, at least in part, even Brahman bulls, renowned for their rodeo bucking qualities, can be made to behave like pussycats. The trick now is to find and put to use the traditional stockman of yesteryear.
That generation, we lost it. Don't know how you're going to pick it up, but you've lost it.
The problem facing the cattle industry is that the horseman's knowledge and skills have largely been squandered. Many have left for the mining industry, where they're promised a much better future.
Because of the mines offering so much, and we're right in their midst, and they offer them a lot more money than us. But the only reason we get blokes is they like the lifestyle.
Television too has done its bit in changing perceptions of the modern day ringer and making recruitment just that little bit harder. To some, it's the Wild West revisited.
I had a young fella come on the mail, and next morning he arrived at the office and he said, when do I get my guns? Today? I said, what guns? He said, all the cowboys have got guns. I thought you issued them. He lasted about 5 days, I think, till the mail come back. The television has got a bit to answer for. Yeah.
All right. Eh? I'm not here to hurt you with it, mate. Eh? It's okay. Eh? Yeah, good.
Hate the terminology as he might, Phil Rohde is what is known as a horse whisperer. What do you think of that term?
Well, there's no such thing. Concerned about people like to label things, but there's no such thing as horse whisperer. There never was and there never will be. There.
What are you, if not a horse whisperer?
He's trying. I'm just somebody trying to get along with horses. Fine. He may not be no big deal. It's just my goal is hopefully one day that I may be a horseman, but it's a hard road. And as far as I'm concerned, there's very few true horsemen in the world.
Horsemanship has become a dying stock and trade in many of Australia's big cattle runs. So much so that some of the owners are retraining stockmen who've lost the knack of saddling, let alone riding a horse.
But I want to be able to roll this hind, see? Get that hind, open it up. And when we first start doing some things, he's going to be a little fearful. Our job is to try and get rid of that fear. We want respect without fear.
The Horse Whisperers Clinic is underway in the yards of Quinnaby Station in the desert country north of Broken Hill.
Well, the size of it is nearly 12,000 square kilometres. So it's running right through the Strzelecki Desert. It's one of, well, it's not one of Kidman's first properties, but it's It's one of his oldest properties. It gets very dry here, so...
The problem facing Paul Jonas and other station managers is that many of their senior stockmen have never been on a horse or are just plain scared.
You haven't been on a horse for years, since you're 4 years old, I understand.
No.
Why?
Just can't seem to trust them. I was put on one when I was little and it took off, so just haven't really been real keen to get back on. Yeah, it's just a bit of a trust thing, I think.
So, over to the horse whisperer, returning the horse to its rightful place on Australia's big runs.
I don't want him as a slave, but there's a lot of people treat him that way. They don't mean to, but I don't want a slave. I'd want something that where hopefully if something went wrong, he'd like to try and look after me a little bit, get me out of trouble, or look after me as well as me look after him, but I don't want to treat him as a slave. I'd sooner treat him as a, well, you can't have a friendship with a horse, but you can have a kinship.
That story reported by Anthony Hoy, the producer Paul Steindl. Now to someone